most dangerous Allied spy in Europe. Hitler wanted her dead. Stalin's agents hunted her. And even inside the CIA, no one ever knew the full truth about what she'd done. This is the unbelievable life of Virginia Hall. You've probably never heard her name in school. No history textbook, no war documentary, no statue in the town square tells her story. And that was by design. Virginia Hall spent her life doing the kind of work you don't brag about. The kind where a single photograph in the wrong hands could get you killed. For more than 30 years, she moved between different names, different passports, and different lives. Sometimes she was a French milkmaid, sometimes a British war correspondent, sometimes a CIA handler sitting quietly in the corner of a Vienna cafe, watching for the man with the folded newspaper. And the wildest part? She did it all with a wooden leg. Virginia Hall was born in 1906 in Baltimore, Maryland, to a wealthy family who believed in tradition. She was expected to marry a man of equal or better standing, have children, and keep her life centered around society events, charity luncheons, and the occasional European trip. But from a young age, Virginia had zero interest in living a decorative life. She was a tomboy before the term was popular, hunting with her father, riding horses, and picking up languages with ease. By the time she graduated high school, she could already speak French and Italian. Later, she would add German, some Spanish, and bits of Russian to her toolkit, a skill set that would eventually save her life. At 20, she left for college in Europe, studying in Paris, Vienna, and Berlin. She wanted a career in diplomacy. In 1931, she applied to the U.S. Foreign Service. But before her career could start, fate and a hunting accident changed everything. It happened in Turkey. She was out hunting birds when her shotgun slipped and discharged into her foot. The injury turned into gangrene. To save her life, doctors amputated her left leg below the knee. She was just 27 years old. Most people would have gone home, recovered, and tried to rebuild some version of a normal life. But Virginia refused to give up her dream of working abroad. She strapped on a custom wooden leg, which she nicknamed Cuthbert, and continued traveling. When she reapplied for the Foreign Service, she was rejected. The official reason? A rule that said amputees couldn't serve as diplomats. The real reason? Sexism and ableism in an era when women weren't expected to do dangerous, high-stakes work overseas. She never forgot that rejection. In fact, you could argue it fueled every single thing she did afterward. In 1939, World War II exploded across Europe. By September, Germany had invaded Poland. France and Britain declared war. Americans were being urged to leave the continent and return home. But Virginia, who was working in Paris at the time, stayed. She volunteered as an ambulance driver for the French army, dodging artillery fire to evacuate wounded soldiers from the front lines. When France fell to the Nazis in June 1940, she escaped to London. It was there that her life changed forever. Britain had just set up a secret organization called the Special Operations Executive, the SOE, nicknamed Churchill's Secret Army. Their mission was sabotage, espionage, and supporting resistance movements in occupied Europe. They were desperate for agents who could blend in, speak local languages, and work under extreme pressure. Virginia checked every box except one. She had a prosthetic leg. Normally, that would have been a deal breaker, but the SOE was desperate, and Virginia was persuasive. They sent her to training, lockpicking, explosives, weapons handling, dead drops, codes. Her instructors were skeptical at first, but she outshot and outsmarted most of the men. Within months, she was back in Nazi-controlled France under the cover identity Marie Monin, a reporter for the New York Post. It was the perfect disguise. Journalists could ask questions, move between cities, and talk to strangers without raising suspicion. In Lyon, she began building a resistance network from scratch. She recruited informants, arranged safe houses, and smuggled radio equipment into the country piece by piece. Every message she sent back to London carried life-or-death information, troop movements, factory production schedules, German patrol routes. She became the key link between London and several French resistance cells. She organized escapes from prisons, arranged supply drops, and coordinated sabotage missions. The Gestapo noticed. By late 1941, They were actively hunting her. They didn't know her name yet, but they called her the Limping Lady. Klaus Barbie, the feared Gestapo chief in Lyon, called her the most dangerous of all Allied spies. A bounty went out for her capture. Posters appeared on walls. An artist's sketch, a vague description. Virginia knew it was only a matter of time before someone recognized her. In 1942, her network was betrayed. Several of her closest contacts were arrested and tortured. Some talked. The Gestapo closed in. London ordered her out. Her escape route? Over the Pyrenees Mountains into Spain. It was December. The snow was knee-deep, the wind sharp enough to cut your skin. And Virginia was doing it with a wooden leg. Each step was agony. Cuthbert rubbing her skin raw, the cold seeping into the joint. She kept going, stopping only to sleep in barns or abandoned huts. On the third day, exhausted and half-frozen, she reached the British consulate in Spain. She sent a radio message to London. "Cuthbert is giving me trouble, but otherwise fine." London, not realizing she was talking about her leg, replied, "If Cuthbert bothers you, have him eliminated." That dark humor kept her going. She was alive. She had made it. Virginia's escape over the Pyrenees should have been the end of her field career. Most agents, after becoming that hot, would be pulled into a desk job, kept safe and used to train rookies. That's what London suggested. But Virginia wasn't having it. She had tasted the game, and the game was in her blood now. She didn't want to file reports. She wanted to make them. The SOE said no. She was too valuable to risk. So Virginia did what she always did when a door closed. She found another one. In 1944, she crossed over to the Americans, joining the OSS, the U.S. Office of Strategic Services, the predecessor to the CIA. The Americans didn't have the same hang-ups about sending her back into danger. They needed people who could operate in France ahead of the D-Day invasion, and Virginia was a proven operator. But she couldn't go back as herself. By now, her face was on wanted lists all across France. So she reinvented herself completely. Gone was the elegant French reporter. In her place was Marcelle Montaigne, an old peasant woman with gray hair, a hunched back, and a shuffle in her walk. She wore shapeless dresses, carried baskets of eggs, and moved with the slow, heavy gait of someone twice her age. Her limp, the one thing the Gestapo had used to identify her, now became part of her disguise. In this new role, she traveled from farm to farm in central France, ostensibly selling cheese and milk. In reality, she was coordinating weapons drops, training guerrilla fighters, and mapping German troop movements. She kept her radio buried in a milk churn, sending coded messages at night while the cows slept in the barn. Her handlers in London were stunned at the amount of intelligence she produced. And she did it all without once getting caught, even though the Gestapo was still combing the countryside for her. When D-Day came in June 1944, Virginia's network swung into action. They blew up train tracks to block reinforcements. They cut phone lines. They ambushed German convoys on narrow country roads, vanishing back into the woods before the enemy could react. One German officer, in a report later captured by the Allies, complained that the resistance in her sector must have an invisible commander, someone who is everywhere at once, but nowhere to be found. That invisible commander was a 38-year-old American woman with a wooden leg. When the Allies liberated France, Virginia finally came out of the shadows, briefly. She was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross by General William Donovan, head of the OSS. She was the only civilian woman in the entire war to receive it. Donovan called her the best of the best. But medals weren't what she was after. The war might have ended in Europe, but the world was already moving into a new conflict. One fought in whispers instead of artillery barrages. In 1947, the OSS became the Central Intelligence Agency. Virginia signed on as one of its very first female case officers. Her new enemy? The Soviet Union. The Cold War was a different kind of battlefield. There were no front lines. The weapons were information, and the casualties often never made the news. Virginia operated mainly in Europe, Paris, Vienna, sometimes further east. Her job was to recruit agents behind the Iron Curtain, intercept Soviet communications, and run disinformation campaigns. She had to be patient, cautious, and utterly unshakable. It was a dangerous game. The Soviets had their own elite counterintelligence service, the NKVD, which later became the KGB. These were men trained to spot a spy from across a crowded street. They worked with brutal efficiency, and when they caught someone, that person rarely saw daylight again. Virginia thrived in this environment. She was calm under pressure, quick to improvise, and an expert at reading people. She could tell if someone was lying by the way they lit a cigarette, or if a meeting spot was compromised by the way a waiter glanced at her table. One of her biggest Cold War coups was turning a Soviet military officer into an American informant. This man, whose name is still classified, had access to troop movement plans and weapon shipments in Eastern Europe. Over the course of months, Virginia met him in parks, cafes, and crowded train stations, always in plain sight, but never lingering long enough to draw attention. The officer's information was gold. It helped the U.S. anticipate Soviet deployments, adjust NATO's defenses, and even win key propaganda battles. But eventually, the KGB noticed something was leaking. They launched a massive sweep, detaining dozens of people. Many disappeared forever. Virginia's asset didn't. She saw the danger coming and smuggled him out of the country under a fake identity, just days before his name hit the KGB's kill list. Her CIA years weren't all triumphs. Inside the agency, she often faced skepticism from younger, male officers who assumed she was just a desk-bound administrator. They had no idea she'd once topped Hitler's most wanted list. She didn't correct them, let them underestimate her. It made her job easier. Through the 1950s and 60s, she worked on multiple fronts, monitoring Soviet activities in Western Europe, tracking former Nazis who had slipped into South America, and training new recruits in counter-surveillance. She also played a quiet but significant role in the propaganda wars of the Cold War, helping to spread stories, some true, some not, that undermined Soviet credibility. Every leaflet, every whispered rumor, every small seed of doubt planted in the mind of a Soviet sympathizer was, in her view, another small victory. By 1966, after nearly 3 decades in espionage, Virginia retired. She bought a farmhouse in Maryland with her husband, Paul Goylet, himself a former OSS operative she'd met in France during the war. She rarely spoke of her work, even to close friends. The neighbors saw a quiet, older woman tending her garden, walking with a slight limp, and assumed she had lived a modest, uneventful life. They had no idea she had once changed the course of wars, twice. Virginia Hall died in 1982, at the age of 76. Her wartime and Cold War service remained largely unknown until decades later, when files were declassified. Even now, much of her CIA work is still locked away in vaults. But here's what we do know. She fooled Hitler's Gestapo. She outplayed Stalin's KGB. And she navigated the halls of the CIA without ever revealing just how much she'd already done. She lived 7 lives, and every single one was lived in the shadows.